right, picture this. Your outside sun's out, friends are over, and there's that smell, that unmistakable smoky pork smell wafting through the air.
Oh, yeah.
It just screams tender, juicy, pulled pork, the kind that melts in your mouth. And anyone who's ever, stood by a smoker working to make that happen, they know it's more than just cooking.
Oh, absolutely.
There's a real art to it.
Yeah, that moment when you take just a regular cut of pork and it turns into something really special, just with low and slow cooking and the magic of smoke, it just shows patience and a little bit of, how-to. And
A little bit of magic.
it's that alchemy that we're going to explore today.
Yeah, that's exactly it.
Yeah.
So if you're listening and you're thinking, all right, I'm ready for some pulled pork perfection, our mission today in this deep dive is to give you the tools to do it right. We get into the science behind it, walk through all the steps, talk about some of the legends in the BBQ world, and even sprinkle in some fun facts along the way so you can really up your BBQ game.
So to give everyone a bit of a roadmap, what exactly are we going to be diving into today?
Great question. We're going to start by really getting into the art and science of smoking. Then we're going to lay out a clear step-by-step guide to making incredible pulled pork. And of course, we can't forget those who shaped the BBQ soon, so we'll tip our hats to some of the legends. And just for fun, we'll throw in some quirky facts that make the whole story even more interesting. So let's break it down. Starting with the core principles, the art and science behind smoking.
Yeah, so what I think is really fascinating here is how using that low indirect heat over a long time with wood smoke, it totally changes the meat. You're not just cooking it through, you're actually breaking down those tough connective tissues, turning them into gelatin, and that's what gives you that unbelievable tenderness and moisture. And then you've got the smoke, and that's not just there for the smell. It actually infuses the meat with flavor molecules. So keeping the temperature consistent is really important. Think of it like a gentle simmer, not a hard boil.
Right.
And the smoke itself, we want what we call clean smoke. It should be thin and bluish because if it's thick and white, it can make the meat taste bitter.
Oh, clean smoke. I like that. That's a good point. So it's all about this balance of time, temperature, and the right kind of smoke all working together.
Exactly.
Now let's get practical. Let's say you're at the store, ready to start your pulled pork journey. What should you look for when choosing the right cut of meat?
Okay, so the foundation of any good pulled pork is the pork shoulder, often called the Boston butt. Now, even though it's called a butt, it actually comes from the upper part of the pig's shoulder.
Huh. Okay, the Boston butt. So why is that the go-to cut for pulled pork?
Well, it all comes down to marbling. That's the fat you see within the meat. As it cooks slowly, that fat melts and it basically bastes the pork from the inside out.
Oh, I see.
This keeps it super moist and adds a ton of flavor. Leaner cuts, they just don't have that natural basting, and you won't get that same rich, juicy result.
So marbling is key, makes sense. So we've got our Boston butt. Yeah. What's the next step in building that awesome flavor?
Next up is the spice rub. This is where you get to layer in those flavors and create that delicious crust, or what we call bark, on the outside of the pork. A good rub usually has paprika for color, and a bit of sweetness brown sugar to help it caramelize, salt and pepper, of course, and then some garlic and onion powder for that extra depth.
Oh, okay.
And you can even experiment with other spices, like chili powder for some heat, or cumin for a more earthy flavor.
So we're not just talking a low sprinkle here. We really need to coat the pork.
All right, don't be shy. Make sure you get every nook and cranny of that pork shoulder. This will ensure you get the same great flavor and bark all over the meat.
All right, the pork's got its rub.
Yeah.
Now, I know a lot of BBQ folks swear by brining. What's the reason for that step?
So brining is all about helping the meat hold on to its moisture while it's cooking. You're basically soaking the pork in salt water, sometimes with a little sugar added. The salt helps to break down some of the muscle proteins, which allows them to hold on to more water.
So it's like prehydrating the meat.
You got it. It's another layer of protection against dryness. Now, a basic brine is just water, salt, and maybe some sugar. You want to make sure the pork shoulder is completely submerged in the brine, and then keep it in the fridge for at least 8 hours, or even better, overnight. This gives the salt enough time to work its magic.
Okay, so it's like a marinade in a way.
Exactly.
Okay.
Now, some people who are really into BBQ, they say they don't like brining because they think it can change the texture of the meat a little bit. It really depends on what you like and what you're going for.
Interesting. So it's one of those things you can experiment with and see what you prefer.
Huh.
Right. Our pork is brined or not, depending on your choice. Rubbed and ready for the smoker. Let's talk about setting up the smoker now.
Yeah, getting the smoker ready is super important. You want to aim for a steady temperature of around 225 degrees Fahrenheit. Now, this low temperature is what lets the fat render slowly and those connective tissues break down. For the wood, you want to think about what kind of flavor you're looking for. Hickory is a classic choice for pork. It's got a strong... So usually you want to put the pork shoulder fat side up. That way, as the fat melts, it'll drip down over the meat and keep it nice and moist and flavorful. And listen, I know it's going to smell amazing, but try not to open the smoker lid too often. Every time you do, you let out heat, which can make the cooking time longer and mess with the overall consistency. Patience is key when it comes to smoking.
Patience. I can practically smell it now.
Yeah.
All right, so the pork is smoking away, the temperature's slowly going up. What's the next thing we should be looking out for?
So once the internal temperature of the pork hits about 165 degrees, you might notice what we call the stall. The temperature seems to stop going up and might even drop a little. This is because of evaporative cooling, which is just moisture leaving the surface of the meat.
Okay.
Don't worry, it's totally normal. This is when a lot of people who smoke meat decide to wrap the pork.
Right. Wrapping it in foil or butcher paper. What's the reason for doing that?
Wrapping the pork helps to get past that stall because it traps the moisture and heat around the meat, creating a sort of steamy environment that helps it cook faster and more evenly. It also helps to keep all that good rendered fat in there. Now you can use heavy-duty aluminum foil, which will give you a softer bark. Or you can use butcher paper, which lets a little more airflow and can give you a firmer bark, but might not keep the moisture in as well as foil. Again, it comes down to what you prefer.
Got it. So wrap it up to get past the stall, and then we keep smoking it until it reaches what temperature inside?
You want to keep cooking that wrapped pork until the internal temperature hits between 195 and 205 degrees.
Okay.
The exact temperature might be a little different depending on the piece of meat, but the main thing is that it should feel probe tender. When you stick a probe or a fork in, it should slide in really easily.
Probe tender. That's the magic word. So we hit that temperature. Can we eat it now?
Almost. This next step is super important for making sure you get juicy pulled pork. It's time to let it rest. Yeah, once it reaches that perfect temperature, take it out of the smoker, keep it wrapped, and let it rest for at least an hour or even longer if you can. You can even put it in a cooler wrapped in towels to keep it warm. This resting time allows the muscle fibers to relax and the juices to spread throughout the meat. If you skip this step and try to pull it right away, all those delicious juices will just run out and you'll end up with dry, pulled pork.
Okay, resting is key, kind of like letting a steak rest before you cut into it. All right, the moment we've been waiting for, it's rested time to pull that pork. What's the best way to do it?
The easiest way is just to use 2 forks, stick them into the meat, and pull them apart in opposite directions. The pork should shred apart really easily into those nice, tender, juicy strands. You might find some bigger pieces of fat or connective tissue that didn't quite melt down. You can just take those out and toss them.
That sounds perfect. Now let's switch gears a bit and talk about some of the people who have really made a name for themselves in the BBQ world. You mentioned Aaron Franklin earlier. What makes him so special in the BBQ world?
Aaron Franklin, he's got this place called Franklin Barbecue in Austin, Texas. He's become like a BBQ legend. What sets him apart is that he's totally dedicated to the basics, and he pays attention to every little detail. I mean, he'll spend hours just tending his fires, figuring out how the airflow and the smoke work with different types of wood. He's super picky about the size and how moist the wood is because he believes it changes the smoke and the flavor of the meat.
Wow.
He's also really careful about temperature control. He makes tiny adjustments to his smokers to keep the temperature just right. And he's shared all this knowledge through his restaurant and his books, and it's really influenced a lot of people, from home cooks to professional pit masters.
It's amazing how focusing on those little things can turn something into an art form. It shows that it's not just following a recipe, it's understanding why you're doing each step.
Exactly. And speaking of understanding, let's talk about some of those interesting facts about BBQ. It's always cool to know where these food traditions came from.
I love those little tidbits, surprise me.
Well, smoking meat isn't just something we do for backyard parties. It actually goes back thousands of years. Ancient cultures, including native people in the Americas, used smoking as a way to keep food from going bad.
Oh,
Smoking would dry out the meat and stop bacteria from growing, which meant they could store food for a lot longer, especially after a big hunt.
that's fascinating.
Yeah,
So what we enjoy as a fun way to cook actually has its roots in survival.
that's right. And here's another interesting regional thing. While a lot of people think of pulled pork with that sweet tomato-based BBQ sauce in South Carolina, they often use a vinegar-based sauce. It's got this tangy, peppery flavor that cuts through the richness of the pork. It's like their own special BBQ style. It just goes to show you how strong these traditions are and how they can be different even in places that are close together.
Yeah, that Carolina vinegar sauce, it really wakes up your taste buds. It shows how much variety there is in the world of BBQ. So as we wrap up our deep dive on pulled pork,
Mhm.
what are the most important things you want people to take away from this?
The main thing is that making really amazing pulled pork takes patience and paying attention to detail. It's important to understand the science behind it, how the fat melts, the tissues break down, and the smoke flavors the meat. Then it's about following those key steps, choosing a good marbling cut, like the pork shoulder, putting on your rub, thinking about whether to brine, keeping the temperature low and steady in the smoker with clean smoke, knowing when to wrap the pork, cooking it to the right temperature and making sure it's probe tender, and most importantly, letting it rest. All those steps come together to make that perfect, juicy, flavorful pulled pork.
So from picking out the right Boston butt to shredding that perfectly cooked meat, it's a journey, but it's definitely worth it. Whether you're just getting started with your smoker or you're trying to improve your skills, I hope this is giving you the knowledge and confidence to make some truly delicious pulled pork.
And remember, BBQ is all about experimenting and learning. Don't be afraid to try different woods, different spices, even different sauces. You'll find your own style that way.
Absolutely. And if you want even more BBQ tips and tricks, check out the BBQ Mastery Series playlist on YouTube. It's full of detailed guides, advice from BBQ masters, and all kinds of BBQ knowledge to help you on your culinary journey.
It's really cool to think about how smoking meat started as a way to preserve food, and now it's this awesome tradition. It brings people together to share and create something special just with time, fire, and flavor. It makes you think about how powerful food is at connecting people.
Yeah.
What are some of your favorite memories or experiences with smoked food?
Yeah, I think
Leave us a comment.
leave us a comment.
Let us know.
Let us know what you think.